Hey everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Study Chronicles, episode 3. Today we're going to go over the hijack versus the big blind, which is actually the most frequent spots in 6max 100 big blind poker. Now, we're going to go over all of the heuristics as I go through the scenario, but first, I'm just going to dive right into the pre-flop ranges and what I'm using as a strategy. You guys can follow along just like previous episodes. If you haven't, go check out the previous episodes because they'll catch you up to the format of these videos. And they will also give you some heuristics from the other scenarios, which will carry over to these. So go check out the other ones if you haven't yet. But we're going to jump right into the most frequent spot in the 6max spot importance sheet. So first off, I'm going to pull up the sheet here. And you will see that we've done the button versus big blind, small blind versus big blind, and now we are on the hijack versus big blind. In the frequency tab on the right, you can see that this is the highest frequency scenario. So you don't really think too much about whether or not early position versus big blind is going to happen a lot. I think the most common studied spot is button versus big blind or blind versus blind. But if you think about under the gun opening, they're going to open a very low frequency, which means there's going to be a lot of folding from under the gun. And then next up is hijack. So hijack is going to open slightly more. And so you have this higher frequency scenario where then the big blind is going to defend a lot because hijack is also typically using a small size to open at 100 big blinds. So if you look at the frequency pop up on the spreadsheet here, you can see that it was used for NL 500, 100 big blind cash games as the data set. So that's where that comes from. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So I'm using the 500 general GTO ranges, as I've mentioned before in other videos. I like these ones. We could take a quick look at what it looks like to defend versus 2.5x versus 2x, but ultimately using a smaller sizing in earlier position is good in theory because the likelihood that we're going to get 3-bet is higher the earlier position we raise. So that is why you often see under the gun or hijack raised to a min sizing or a 2x sizing. And later position, you start seeing a little bit of a bigger sizing from the cutoff or the button. So this is based on theory. There is, very little EV gain for using these sizings compared to just using a 2.5x across the board, which is what a lot of people do. So using 2.5x is also very viable. You can even go as high as 2.7, 2.8. I've seen some players use 3 in early position. I don't really think that's optimal, but you can get away with it if you play that range well and you tighten up. So we're going to use the small min raise and we're going to have a look at the big blind defend. But first, let's look at the raise combos here for hijack. So we are going to be raising min, which means we're going to get away with some wider hands like Queen 8, Jack 8 suited. These are maybe less common for higher rake games. The higher the rake, the less you want to open in general. So you are going to see some Queen 10 off, Jack 10 off at the bottom. Ace 9 off starts to open at a small frequency. King 5 off, or King 5 suited, as the weakest suited king. And the low pairs are mixing a frequency, so 4s, 3s, and deuces, but 5s is the threshold for pure opening. So pretty standard opening range. This is going to be similar for most people. You might add a few hand combos if the rake is lower. If the rake is higher, you might take away a few combos and focus more on the high card equity. So maybe you would, raise something like King 5, King 4 suited, but then take away some of the low pairs or something like that. It really depends on the exact structure. So we have this as a raise in the hijack versus a raise. We are going to see a 12.3x big blind 3-bets. Now, again, we've talked about this before, but if you have a higher 3-bet in size, so a bigger 3-bet I should say. If you have a bigger 3-bet, then you're going to go more polar. If you have a smaller 3-bet, you're going to have more of a linear range. But ultimately, you're going to focus on the same weak-hand bluffs, hands like suited aces, suited kings, suited connectors. These are your bread and butter 3-bets out of position. So when you defend, you are still going to have these combos, but they are going to be less of a frequency than something like Jack 7 suited or something like Queen 4 suited, something that doesn't 3-bet at all. And then the premiums that are going to pure 3-bet are only 4 or 5 different hands. You have aces, ace king suited, ace queen suited, queens, and kings. So this little section here is the only hands that are going to pure 3-bet. So when you're defending out of the big blind versus hijack, you are going to have a disadvantage on ace, king, queen type textures. So keep that in mind for post-flop heuristics. Other than that, there's going to be some weaker ace X offsuit combos that defend, some offsuit one gappers versus this min raise. So as weak as 5-4 off for the no gappers, and the offsuit, or sorry, the suited 10-3 suited 10-4, 8-4 type of hands are towards the bottom of the range. So once we defend from the big blind, we're going to look at the global strategy here. So leading out of the big blind is a thing. Okay, so previously it's been thought that you should never be leading if you weren't the pre-flop aggressor, but now we're in 2025 and you can lead on certain textures where you have the advantage. So that's going to be the theme throughout all of these single raise pots, is you can definitely have a lead range if the board texture looks like it's hitting your range well. And you have maybe a slight advantage or close to an even advantage. I guess an even equity, I guess you could say. So leading out of the big blind is going to be mostly 8 high and lower textures. You can see here on the left, if you group them, you'll see that there's going to be a consistency with 8 high and lower. Connected is better, so 8-7-6, 7-6-5, 4-3-2. These are all board textures in which you can have a lead, because you can also have the nuts. So you can have on a 7-6-5 board, you can have 8-9, you can have 4-3, which the hijack won't have 4-3. You can also have 8-4 suited, which the under the gun also won't have. So there is some discrepancy here between the actual strong straights and even sets that are going to be in our range at 100% frequency, because we're not 3-betting those low pairs. So that's why you see a lot of leads come out from the big blind on these textures, is that we have all of the strong hands, all of the straights, all of the sets, all of the 2 pairs, and under the gun, or sorry, I keep saying under the gun, hijack is not going to have a lot of those 2 pairs or straights. So once we get past leading, there are a couple of other, board textures which are a little more rare, but do have a lead. Something like a monotone ace high board. A board texture like this is less intuitive for leading because you see the ace and the king. But the best way to think about this is if you think about who has the most nutted combos here, we have a lot of suited queens here, right? We have a lot, if not all of the suited queens in our range, which means we're going to actually have the nuts on this texture. Even though the board is ace king, we have the nuts, right? So monotone boards are an exception to this rule of like, look at the board, compare your advantages, because it just looks deceptive. But when you look at it, you'll see we have all of the suited queens. We have a lot of the suited jacks, which hijack also is not going to have. So there's a lot of hand combos for these certain one-off textures that are going to be leads if you can find them as well. Something like ace 3-2, ace 4-3, ace wheel. That's another exception to the under 8 high card rule. So you can see there's some leads here. And that's also because, again, we have this like category of straights and 2-pair and sets at a very high frequency. So yeah, pretty cool if you wanted to take some time and look through all of the leading boards. But that's the heuristic of it all, is that you either look at an 8-high board for a lead that's connected, or you look at something like a monotone ace high or an ace high wheel. So once we check, then the global strategy for the hijack is going to be a mixed strategy. So I have 4 sizings. Again, this might seem overwhelming, but if you just group them into small, medium, large, and overbet, it becomes a little bit more palatable to try and figure out what goes into what category, right? Instead of thinking I have 4 sizings, think I have 4 buckets. I have 4 sizing buckets: overbet, large bet, medium bet, small bet. And how does my hand want to fit into these buckets? Does it want to go for a large size? Does it want to go for an overbet size? How strong is this hand in my range? That's the things that you're going to be thinking about when c-betting the hijack. And you can see that there is a 69 roughly % chance that you're going to c-bet here. Otherwise, you're going to have a 31% check frequency. So there is some checkbacks. Again, it's going to be on those board textures where we don't have an advantage. So you're going to see a lot of ace high monotones are good for checking back, right? Ace king, ace 4, 3 of hearts type of hands. There's going to be those low rundowns, 7, 6, 5 that we just talked about. So it goes for both sides when you're looking at the advantage. Does the big blind have an advantage on this board, or does the hijack have an advantage on this board? If the big blind has an advantage, you're going to see leads from the big blind. You're also going to see checkbacks from the hijack at a higher frequency than normal. So the global c-bet frequency is roughly, like I said, 69%, but the check frequency is 31, and then on those disadvantaged boards, it's going to be up to like 63, 60, 59. Going to be a lot of checking here. So that being said, I don't think there's anything else to cover for the pre-flop stuff. We're kind of flying through this one, but it is going to be similar ideas in theory to the button versus big blind. We just have a tighter range. So when you have a tighter range, you're going to be able to c-bet at a higher frequency. And then you're also going to have board textures where you're going to completely miss some of the boards, which is why it's possible that the big blind has more leads versus the hijack than it does versus the button on some occasions. But overall, we are going to have a higher frequency c-bet, and big blind is going to have to deal with that. So against a c-bet, for the small size, big blind is going to check raise 2 different sizings. I think it's mostly going to elect for the 50, but there's also going to be the 100. So same idea as before versus the button. But versus the overbet, there's going to be less check raising. And we're only using the 50 sizing. So same ideas as before. I think we can actually just get right into the drills and talk about more of the heuristics of the different flop configurations and the scenario. So if we go to the drill here, that's already pre-designed for us in the spreadsheet. I'm going to switch up the settings really quick to reflect my own solutions. So 100 GTO, 6 max general looks good. And then we're going to have the display of, the mode of low RNG. And looks good. Let's start the training. So first things first, we're defending the big blind, and we're raising from the hijack. So first up, we're in the hijack, 10 high board. This is a board texture that is actually one of the more tricky ones because We can have a lot of sizings here. We have an overpair advantage. However, we don't necessarily have a strong nut advantage because big blind's not 3-betting 10s at a high frequency. So big blind is going to have 10s, 6s, and 4s. However, again, we're going to have the queens, the kings, and the aces at a higher frequency, which allows us to use a bigger sizing. So we can have a mixture of small, medium, large, perhaps even overbet. I don't think we're overbetting this texture because of the lack of the nut advantage that I mentioned. So if I was going to choose, it's either small, medium, or large. We RNG'd 100. Let's make this focus mode so we can focus better. So I think we're going to mostly check here if I roll 100, but this is a hand that could probably go small as well. Once it goes check, check, we have a big blind lead on the turn. So the big blind should have multiple sizings for leading. This sizing is indicative of something like a 6, maybe something like a weak 10, perhaps for the value. Maybe 7s, 8s, and 9s are also going to mix in the small size. But for the weak hands, you're going to see diamonds, you're going to see a 5, you're going to see a random 7. Like queen 7 even is going to probably take this sizing. Do I want to float here? This is tricky. This is one of those spots that I could use some study in because it is hard to deal with small sizings when you have these weak showings, because in order to not get exploited by our opponents, we do need to defend the turn here. That being said, we do check a lot of stronger hands. We don't always have to just call our ace high. If we check our overpairs, if we check our second pairs, if we check our third pairs, all those hands, we're going to be fine. But once in a while, we're going to have to defend some high card hands, maybe some draws that we turn. This one is right in the bottom part of our range, I have to imagine. No draw, no pair, just ace high. Man, I actually don't know what to do. I think fold is my go-to here, but I do think call. I think we're going to be indifferent, but I think, let's call. You can see there's a 70% call, so it turns out we're probably folding 30%. Once we get to the river, this is now again a bit tricky. So this is bluff catching, at its core, right? We're not beating any value. We are blocking some of their value with ace 10 and queen 10 for this sizing. We're also perhaps blocking some ace 4 offsuit if they defend that. We're definitely blocking queen 4 suited, so that's nice. The weak hands, like I mentioned, are going to be something like queen 7. They're going to have something like missed diamonds, perhaps. Again, we don't need to call this 100% because we're going to have stronger hands to call turn and get to river. So I think, again, my default is fold here, but I'd rather call something like ace queen of clubs, which does a better job of blocking some of the suited combos here that might not be in the offsuit combos. So maybe they're folding ace 6 offsuit, but they have ace 6 of clubs that might be, value betting this size on river. So I'm going to fold. I do think it's close, and you can see villain showed 9 high, which is definitely part of the bluffing range. So we missed out on that one. But going through that hand again, I do think that we just had an option for every street here. So you can see on the flop, we had the small, medium, and large. We did not have an overbet, as I mentioned. Not the best board for overbetting. Then on turn, we could have mixed between call and fold. And then on the river, we could have mixed between call and fold. So you might think to yourself, well, what the hell? I could just do anything here. It doesn't matter, right? But understanding why the hand is indifferent is important to understanding how to construct your ranges for combating certain sizings. So if villain is going small sizing, you have to call more often. If you have to call more often, you might be forced to call some weaker hands that don't necessarily seem like they're great at the time. But once you get to showdown and you see what they're bluffing, you're like, oh, this makes a lot more sense. So don't hesitate to defend versus the smaller sizings with weaker hands if you think that it's possible villain is going to have enough bluffs in their range. Out of position now, 7 high board. So as a heuristic, you would think maybe this is a leading type of texture. And it's possible. I'm not sure if we can actually lead this one, but in general, you also want to have a more connected board. Okay, because yes, we have 7s and 3s and deuces in our range. However, there isn't that big of a discrepancy between hijack and big blind on a texture like this. But if you make it 7, 4, 5, all of a sudden we have 2 or 3 different straights that are not in hijack's range. So just make sure that if it is a 7 high or 8 high board, that it is more connected, not something like medium, low, low like this. I'm just going to be a check fold for me. All right, so now we're in position again, king high board. This is going to be, so again, if you think of our global c-bet frequency, 69% of the time, this is going to be a typically good board for us. So it's probably going to be a high frequency c-bet, which means if I RNG low and we have a good hand, we're going to c-bet this one. Typically, on a high, low, low board like this, you're going to use a small or medium size. You're not going to often overbet textures like this because, again, villain has pocket 6s and pocket 4s at a high frequency. It's only when the big blind doesn't have a majority of the sets or nutted hands that you'll see an overbet on. There are some exceptions to the rule, of course, but generally you're not going to see an overbet on a texture like this unless we have like pocket aces or ace king at a small frequency. Maybe something like king 6 suited or pocket 6s as well. But this texture, I'm going to go for the small size and villain folds. But just to make sure I'm not making things up, we're going to look back at that hand and look at the different sizing choices we can have. And you can see that it's a majority of small, medium, and a little bit of large. So you can use some large on this texture, but there's only a 3.2% overbet frequency. And if we look at the overall strategy, it's probably going to be, I want to say around that, maybe lower. Let's see. I might be wrong here. Nope, 3%. Yeah, it's a pretty low frequency for overbetting. And like I said, most of it's going to come from aces. Most of it's going to come from pocket 6s, something like king 6 suited. So you don't have to really worry about overbetting these types of textures where obviously if you change this card to like a jack, I think that's going to increase the frequency of overbetting. As you can see, it's now 9%. So the second card really does make a big difference. And then at the most extreme example, if we put an ace out there, it's going to jump up to 50% overbet, right? So it really matters what the other two cards are on the board, not just the highest card. Big blind versus hijack, out of position. This is a monotone board. However, it doesn't really make sense that we would want to lead something like this. Villain's going to have a high concentration of suited aces and suited kings in their opening range. So I don't think we're going to have a lead. Versus the medium size bet, we have second pair, no spade. This is a little bit of a tricky spot, especially monotone boards, because I feel it's not easy out of position if you don't have the draw, because the draw is going to come in a certain percentage of the time, and we're just sitting there like, now what? So out of position monotone boards can get tricky. I think we're just going to start with a call. Yeah. So we already made a mistake there. This is perhaps just a pure fold versus the half pot sizing, but we're going to play this out as if we know what we're doing. Small bet on river maybe. So yeah, good thing I prefaced that with these are tricky spots, because I do think that I tend to make some mistakes here as well. And you can see that this is a pure fold without the spade. So an under pair without the spade versus the half pot sizing. So that's the key, right? Versus the half pot sizing. Villain's going to have a couple of sizings here, which are going to be small or medium. And when they use the medium size, really pay attention, because I do feel like this is probably unbalanced from a lot of people. But if they do use the small sizing, I think sevens is going to be a fine call. As you can see, it's 100% call. So you can see how finicky the solver is when it comes to small versus medium sizing when you're out of position and you're defending. So any excuse to fold if they go for a bigger sizing is potentially a good thing. But if they go a small sizing, you do need to continue with those weaker hands. So in that spot, I was wrong because of the medium size. 654, this is a great board for the big blind. In fact, they could be leading a lot on this texture. So that being said, we should always have a check back frequency on these textures, okay? So if we can recognize that this is a texture that's good for the big blind, as the hijack, you can always choose to check back. You're not going to be betting 100%, I don't think. Don't quote me on that because there's going to be exceptions, but of the time, you're going to have probably something like a 40 or 30% C bet if the global was something like 69. I keep saying 69 so it sticks in your head so that you understand that from the hijack, you know, your C bet frequency will look like that. Even though it's a meme, you'll now never forget this. So 654 in position. I RNG'd a low number. If we're going to choose a sizing, so back to sizing theory, if we're going to choose a sizing, like I said before, we're never going to overbet. We're never going to overbet because this is a texture in which the big blind has close to an advantage, if not an advantage. And we have a bunch of overpairs that don't really want to bet three streets here. We're not really excited about betting flop, turn, and river because it's hard for us to find a perfect run out that Jax is going to get maximum value from. Like the perfect run out would be a 4-turn 4 river, or like a jack turn brick river, right? Or board pair river. But like most of the time you're going to see something like an overcard to the jack and then a spade, or like a 7 on the turn and then like, you know, a brick, whatever. So small bet here is fine, but you can see there's a lot of checking that goes on. 10 turn is one of the better turns for us. Villain's not going to have too much pocket tens. Yeah, they will actually. They'll probably have most of the pocket tens in their range. But we did RNG another low number. So again, we can go for a bet on turn. This was an overcard technically, so I don't think we want to be overbetting. I think if we're going to choose a sizing, it's going to be large or medium. So I'm going to try large this time, and villain folds. But you can see the frequency of check on a flop like that is pretty high. So 40% check, right? We could also go medium, and a little bit of large is sneaking into a board texture like this. I didn't realize that you could have a large sizing, but that does make sense on 654 specifically because we do have 8-7 suited in our range. We do have all of the low pairs in our range. So maybe dividing our range up to a large bet as well, not a bad idea. Ace 8-7, big blind versus hijack. We're never leading this flop texture. Check, check. Okay, so here's the interesting spot that we haven't looked at yet, which is on a delay c-bet scenario when the big blind is to act. So versus a check as the big blind, to put it more simple, we're going to see an array of sizings. We're going to see small, medium, large, and overbet. Because once villain checks the flop back, first of all, it's going to depend a lot on the texture of what we do. But I want to look through a couple of quick scenarios of how the big blind reacts versus a hijack check here in position. So first, let's look at a board that really favors us, right? 6-5-4. If it goes check, check. A 10 is actually a good card because it's kind of a brick. You can see the big blind has the option for all of the sizings, including a very large overbet. So this sizing is somewhat unique, but is essentially when we have a nutted range that the SPR is still very high, and we are trying to get our stacks in. That's the best way I can really explain it, is why the solver is going 2.5x on the turn here. Because if we had something like 8-7 suited, right, if we pull this up, you'll see that it mostly wants to bet 250% pot. And then the reason is because if we go 250 on the turn and villain calls, and let's say the river's a random card, I don't know, let's actually do a random card, a deuce. You'll see that now the solver wants to jam, right? It still wants to jam that 8-7 combo that it was setting up for the river on the turn. And it's going to jam some bluffs, of course, some hands that might improve, something like King 3 improved to a straight. So that's going to be a good one to jam. So there is this new sizing of 2.5x. I think we might have seen this button versus big blind versus a button check back. It's same idea. But it is an interesting sizing to incorporate in your strategy if you can recognize you're on the turn, you have really polarized equity, which means you either have the absolute nuts or you have a very strong draw, something like Queen 3, so some kind of straight draw, maybe something like a flush draw with the nut ace of spades, so ace 9 of spades, ace deuce of spades. These are the types of hands that want to bet the 250 sizing on turn. In this scenario, we're going to mostly check. An ace high board that gets checked back, that's going to be less of an advantageous board for us. However, this is another scenario in which we can have some overbets because it's a polar board texture, right? Like an ace high board, we're not really looking to bet thin for value when it goes check, check. Let's say the turn's in 3 of diamonds first. We're still going to see those 250 bets, right? We're still going to see this. In fact, instead of using the other sizings, now the solver wants to mostly check or use 250%. So it really wants to polarize range here because this is a texture that's going to mostly favor hijack on flop. And then on turn, we're still going to have some of those nutted equity type of hands that want to get 2 streets all in. So something like pocket eights, perhaps. Where's pocket eights? Oh, am I not? There we go. Pocket eights, pocket sevens, these types of hands, right? So pocket threes, of course. So these are the hands that now want to go for the really big sizing. So we saw that we have multiple sizings on a board that favors us. We have more so of a polar sizing on boards that don't favor us. Well, what about the ones in between? The ones in between are going to be like, I don't know, maybe a jack high board. So something like jack 7 deuce turn 3, right? This is going to be one of those spots where we're going to have, again, probably multiple sizings. We're going to have, the small, the medium, the large, and the overbet. Just because, again, we're just going to have a bunch of different hand categories. You can see ace jack is going for the 250. You can see something like a set. Then you have this other category of hands, which are going to be like the good hands, which are going to mostly go the small sizing. So something like Queen 7, a draw that has some, equity, like, diamond draws at a mix. You're going to have some under pairs to the jack for the small sizing, but it mostly wants to use hands like second pair, mostly wants to use some under pairs and third pairs. But most of the time it's going to check with that category, the good hands. And then again, if you want to look at the stronger hands, they're going to mostly go really big or large sizing. So again, don't get overwhelmed about how many sizings you have. If you think about the categories, if you think about the equity buckets and how they fall into each bucket, it'll be a lot easier to decipher. I'm going to check this spot on turn. That was a little bit of a long-winded discussion on the turn scenario, but it's an important one that I think a lot of players don't spend enough time studying. So I just wanted to put some attention on that. On the river, straight comes in. We don't really have a good category of hand. We have second pair on a board texture that has straights. So we have if you think about just the categories that beat us, top pair, two pair, sets, and straights. So we have, a really weak hand here. Don't think we can get a lot of value by small betting. Facing a 2x, almost 2x, overbet on river. This is basically repping a 10, maybe some sets, and maybe some slow played 6-5 or something like that. But for the most part, this is going to be a 10 or air. We don't really block too many combos here because Jack 10 would probably have bet the turn in their shoes. So the Jack's not very valuable in that sense, unless they're betting, this sizing with pocket Jacks, which is possible, but I think it's more so going to be a 10. So having maybe something like ace queen would be a very nice bluff catch here. Something like ace 9, which blocks 9, 10, and all the sets, of course. I don't know what the answer is here, but I think it's mostly going to be fold. And you can see villain found a bluff with king queen, which makes a lot of sense. Jack high board, big blind versus hijack. So it's on us, and we have complete dust in position. Well, a jack high board, let's break this down. Jack high board is probably in our favor, but not by much, right? Because villain's going to still have pocket jacks for the defending range, pocket 3s and pocket 2s. They're going to have jack 3 and jack 2 suited. So it's pretty close to like a 50-50 board, if I had to guess. Which means we can have maybe a higher global check than usual, or about an average global check, which the global check we know is the opposite of 69, which is 31% of the time. We're going to check here. We rolled a 20. So that is underneath. If we're going to bet this flop, let's call it, 69% of the time, maybe a little less. So let's say like 60% of the time. This is still well within the 60% frequency. So I could go small bet here. So if you don't have an idea, that's when you draw on all of the global frequencies, right? That's what I just did there to figure out, okay, I can probably c-bet this one close to 60%, maybe a little under 60% of the time, because this isn't really a great hand. Sometimes you just don't want to bet flop if you don't have much equity. But there is little connectivity with this 5 here on the 3-deuce board, where if we turn a 4, if we turn an ace, if we turn a 6, we can continue bluffing, right? So you also have to think about your future blockers, not just exactly what's on the board here. We turned a king, which is actually a pretty good card for us in general. So I think if we had to, we could small bet here again on the turn, or medium bet the turn. But I'm going to check this time. We rolled high. We have some showdown value here. We don't have a strong hand category anymore. There's a flush on the board now. So if you think about it, there's a flush, 2 pair, sets, and we're sitting here with top pair, weak kicker, probably the worst kicker, or second worst kicker. So not really high up on our category for value betting. Going to check back. And on river, we face a small bet. This is always going to be a call. We're never folding top pair, and we win the pot. So these are the things that I kind of think through every single hand. I'm thinking about my advantages. I'm thinking about who's got the best categories. I'm trying to fit the right sizing into those categories. And ultimately, we're going to arrive at the river. So if you just take that thought process through the flop all the way to the river, you're going to find yourself at the river with a combo, and you're going to make the right decision more or less, most of the time when it comes to if it's an obvious call or an obvious fold. The bluff catchers can get tricky, but hopefully that, line of thinking helps you make decisions better. Hijack versus big blind, 10-9-7. This is not a leading texture very often, but I could see it sometimes. Definitely not this hand. Diamonds. Another good heuristic is if the board texture looks like it's a lead, but you have absolute no equity, where you have the wrong suit and no connectivity, no pair, no draw, you can pure check that hand. You don't have to be leading hands like that. So I'm going to check all the way down. And then once we get to the river, this is potentially a bluff spot. Yeah, I'm going to actually bluff this one because the idea is if you get to the river out of position in a check down pot, you need to bluff something. You can't just pure check every single time you get down to the river with no pair, no draw, right? Or I guess there's no draws on the river, but no pair. So it's a matter of figuring out whether you have removal effects that are relevant here. One of the things that you have to look at is your blockers. So queen, is a queen good, right? Well, what are they going to call on the river here that check down to the river? They could have queen jack, so a queen's relevant. They could have pocket queens, that's slow played, but less likely there. I think they're going to bet the turn at a higher frequency. They could check back something like queen nine suited that checked the flop, so that's relevant. We are blocking the nut straight, I should say, king queen. So that's actually an important one because they could easily check that twice. So it kind of makes sense to bluff this hand if you think about it, right? Are they going to call ace queen? Maybe they even call ace queen instead of fold, which would mean this is even better for bluffing. So I'm going to go for the 78 sizing here, which was a mistake. And I think I have an idea why that was a mistake. And it has to do with the 4 of diamonds in my hand. So when it comes to river bluffing, you kind of want to use both cards in your hand to bluff. So let me take a closer look here. You can see that it was close to being 0 EV, but not quite. So minus 0.03, right? So then what should we bluff on a river in a check down scenario in a single raise pot? This is also a very understudied but very important scenario in single raise pots in general. So checks down here. It's a jack high board. There's a 1 card straight out there. What are we bluffing? Well, it looks like we have a couple of sizings. We have small, large, and overbet. If you wanted to simplify this, probably just take out the large or only use the large. But if you want to have 2 sizings, overbet seems a little bit more frequent, and so does small bet. So let's look at what we're going to overbet first with. So if we're going to choose a bluff with an overbet size, it looks like we're actually using a lot of the 1 card deuce X combos. So I think this has a lot to do. Having a 2 in your hand unblocks the under pairs to the board that are going to fold. So again, if you think about the idea of bluffing rivers, you want to unblock folds. Yes. And block value. So what this hand does is it unblocks hands like 3s, 4s, 5s, 6s that might have checked the flop and get to the river. So if we see on the river that I overbet and we look at the folding range of villain, you can see all of these hands are where we derive our equity from, right, for bluffing. So you don't want to really block the non-deuce X combos, because look at all of these hands folding here too. So the deuce X is only ever really going to block ace deuce and deuces. So if you ever have a deuce in your hand, that could be a good indication that you could find a bluff as a heuristic. A suited deuce is going to do well in also just frequency, I guess you could say. Like, you're not really going to be defending too many offsuit deuces, I don't think. If any, ace deuce is gone. Yeah, you're just going to have deuces and ace deuce on a texture like that. Well, these hands too, of course, but there are no offsuit deuce X. So you don't have to really worry too much about over bluffing most of the time whenever your hand is suited. So let's see. What else are we going to bluff? So the suited deuces with an ace or non-ace. But the ace and the king and the queen also do a good job of blocking over pairs that check back to the river. So you can see here, we're blocking aces that checked twice in position We're blocking kings that check back twice in position. So blocking those calls is why you see the ace and the king actually bluffing here. It's sometimes counterintuitive to bluff ace high, but this might be a specific board texture for it. And then for the small sizing, the bluffs for the small sizing are going to be suited kings and suited queens. So these do a decent job of blocking the Jack X hands that get to the river, like King Jack, like Queen Jack, pocket kings, pocket queens. So my choice of using, what did we use? Queen 4 of diamonds. So that would have potentially, sorry. Here we go. So that would have potentially been an okay small bet bluff. So I wasn't that far off with choosing, that hand to bluff. But I just chose the wrong sizing. This one's better for the small bet, and it's probably better for the small bet because typically when you choose between a small bet or an overbet, the small bet is going to block folds. The overbet is going to unblock folds, and it's a better hand to use as the overbet. So looks like these, if we go for the small size, let's see. What are we blocking that folds? Okay, so the mirrored combos are going to fold. So something like King 5, King 6 are just going to fold river. But also this is why, okay? Ace Queen is going to fold river. High frequency. Ace King is going to mix fold river. So we don't want to be blocking the Ace Queen without blocking something else, I guess. It's a little tricky. Like I said, whenever you have a wide range, multiple sizings, it can get tricky. But I think the reason we see Queen 4 is suited specifically go for small sizes because of these folds here and then these folds here, right? But then if you look at the overbet size, Queen 4 does disappear, and it wants to use the Queen Deuce. So then you look at the Queen Deuce, what that covers, and that does still, block these folds, but it doesn't block as much as this and this at a higher frequency. It's slightly better. So it is tricky, but play around with river spots like that and go back and forth and really look through what the solver likes to bluff, what it doesn't like to bluff, and why. And you can find some ideas for river spots like that, which are definitely under bluffed. King Jack, hijack versus big blinds. This is one of those boards where, again, we can probably go a few sizings. There's no range advantage for the sets. So I would not want to go an overbet here, but I do think we're going to have small, medium, and large. We RNG'd higher or lower. We RNG'd lower than the global C-bet frequency. So this isn't a bad spot to go something like small, medium, or large. We don't have a spade. We have 2 overcards, but I think this one's going to want a large bet with king high on a 9 high board. Let's go for the small bet. I think this is never going to be a mistake, but I do like large bet too on a texture like this. Turn's an ace, which is a unique turn. So if we go back to our heuristics from button versus big blind, this is a polarizing turn. But we don't want to be over betting. We want to be large betting, checking perhaps some medium or small, but I don't think that's going to be a thing. So on this particular run out with this particular hand, I think check makes the most sense. I was wrong. And we get overbet into on the river. I'm going to fold. So we missed a turn bet, it looks like, with this hand. Maybe king high is more of a mandatory bet, but let's take a look. So on the turn, ace high turn, hijack versus big blind. Okay, so we will see a decent amount of those medium and large bets that I mentioned. And it looks like the category of king high does typically want to bet here. So this is the difference between button and hijack, okay? From the hijack, king high is no longer really looking to show down because there's a lot of weaker hands that can fold the turn versus another bet. And we have some equity with overcards. So if I have something like king jack of diamonds here, for example, it's a hand that can put in some medium and large bets and get something like pocket threes to fold pure, right? Even though we're ahead of the draws some of the time here. So like if they have 8-6, 6-5 spades that miss, we're ahead of those. But also those are going to probably bluff out of position versus a check at a decent frequency. So instead of trying to get to river, it looks like from the hijack, we're going to be betting more of our king high. And then having a, I guess, offsuit combo that has some potential for blocking hearts on river, that's going to be, I guess, the prime combo for us to be betting the turn. So club heart, you can see here, this one, if my face isn't blocking it, is a pure bet, but it's not a huge mistake to check the turn. You can see there are other king jack combos that do want to check, but it looks like the offsuit ones are pretty good for betting turn. The good thing about something like king jack is it does block some strong ace high hands like ace jack, ace king that turned an ace. Do they have ace king here for defending? They do. Small frequency, but it is relevant. So yeah, that's why I think we see some more king jack playing out as a turn bet. If we had turn bet, the next logical question is going to be, do we bluff the river? So if I turn bet king jack offsuit, club heart, let's say we did go for the 75 sizing. River's a brick. Let's say a deuce. Actually, let's do a different brick. 4. That's a pretty bricky card. In position, king jack is not going to bluff. So perhaps I got ahead of myself here, not bluffing turn, but it is a good turn bet than river give up. And instead on the river, we're going to probably bluff something that has less showdown, like queen high, 10 high, jack high. Those are going to be more of our targeted hands. Also, ace king isn't as relevant as something like ace queen and ace jack at this point. So that's why you see the queen high or the jack high hands be more of the bluffs by the river. There are going to be some king high bluffs here. King queen specifically, probably again because it does a good job of blocking the ace queen. But not the offsuit combos, interestingly. Yeah. If you go back and forth between call and rate and the bet, you'll see why the blocker effects are the way they are. So, all right, we're going to go over one last hand. I think we've covered a lot so far today. Out of position. Well, let's play one more hand, I should say. Turn is going to be a check pure. So anytime someone checks a board that's really advantageous for them, like ace 10 deuce, the most common thing you're going to have on turn is check. So if you don't know what to do on turn and it's a board texture on the flop that was good for them, just check the turn. Interesting river. So again, we want to unblock folds. So 9s and 5s. 5s probably aren't in their range because 5s are going to bet somewhere along the flop or turn. 9s is actually a bad card to block because they should have 9s by river, I imagine. But this could be a decent candidate for bluffing. And we could go over bet or small bet. We're not going to go into that trap of large bet again. What would be the best bluff here? This is always tricky. Maybe something like pocket threes, because that does a good job of unblocking the other pairs that have to fold, whereas a 9 high hand blocks the 9s. Man, I'm going to check this time, but it wouldn't surprise me if I mix bluff the river here. Nope, this is 100% check. Okay. So let's play one last hand here. And then I do want to look at that last river spot for the 9-5 suited before we call it a day. Jack high board, in position, low RNG, decent board texture for us. We definitely have the overpair advantage. The board texture, we don't really have the nut advantage, but it's close. Probably can have most sizings here. I'm going to go for the large size or medium size. Let's go medium. Turns a 5 of spades. Pretty bad for this hand. I think typically I would check here. I want to have a little more equity for betting turn other than just 4 outs. But we do have a gutter too with an overcard. So we have an extra 3 outs if they have a jack. I don't mind turn betting this one. I don't think we would ever go overbet. I don't think we want to go large bet too often, but maybe. Let's go medium again. Looks like that was the right sizing. But that's a cool hand. So let's go back to the 9-5 and look at that river spot. So this is going to be, if anything you take away, figuring out how to river bluff in a check down pot. That's important. Something I need to work on as well. And you can see here there is only the so it did the opposite of what I said. I was going to use the overbet of small, but it does just use the one size 78% here with the one liner for the Broadway hands. So what are we bluffing here? Well, it looks like mostly those low card combos. So I was right to, I think, consider 9-5 suited because it's right on the verge of, these combos here. But mostly we're trying to, I think, unblock those more popular check down hands like 9s, 8s. So you see a lot of bluffing from, man, I should have thought of this. Yeah, the deuce. Again, here's the deuce. But this time we have a pair, so it's even better for bluffing because it blocks some slow played sets or maybe some ace deuce suited that check twice. I don't know. But the main thing is it does a good job of unblocking some of the folds, right? When we have a pair on the flop, it's less likely they're going to have a hand that they're folding. So yeah, this is a cool spot to find a bluff with a low pair. Makes sense. So if we go for the 78 sizing, we see hijack. This is that main kind of hand grouping that we're targeting, 9s and 8s. And then you have a mix of raising for their underpairs, spicy. But it makes sense because if we're bluffing a 2, we always get 3s to fold. We get these to fold at a mix. And 9s and 8s and even some 10x are folding. The other thing is we're unblocking the folds of ace deuce, like I mentioned. It's nice to have the deuce in our range because ace 5, ace 4, ace 3 are all folding. So cool. Very cool spot. I hope that really helped you guys. It's a tough scenario when you get to the river and check down spot, but I think that's worth a lot to study. We looked over most of the heuristics, all of the global frequencies for hijack and big blind in a single raise pot. So we looked at some turn betting when check to from the hijack. So yeah, a lot of stuff in this video. I hope it does help, and I'm happy to see you guys in the next video.